What got you there? What got you? What got you there with Sean DeLaney?
I'm Sean DeLaney, and on this episode of What Got You There, I sit down with one of my all-time favorite thinkers, Nick Kokonas. Nick started out as a derivatives trader and then went on to found the restaurant Alinea, which quickly became the #1 restaurant in the world. But Nick is a continual and lifelong learner, and he ended up also starting the technology company Tock, which was recently acquired by Squarespace. If you want to deep dive into one of the most interesting thinkers there are, you're going to love this episode with Nick Kokonas. Nick, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I am doing really well. So during our last conversation, one of the things that came up is you love discovering new things. And one of the questions you love is, when's the last time in your life you felt like something was new? So I'm wondering, have you come across anything, let's just call it the last year, that it just felt like a new experience for you with something so different?
I think we all did, right? I mean, the first thing, I'm going to go with like a product and an experience. And obviously, the COVID experience was new for all of us. And it's too soon to talk about it in some ways, but it was very, very interesting that when it became evident that there would be lockdowns and whatnot. I remember we sat down, my wife and I sat down one evening and went, like, we were watching the news and we were like, wow, this is just surreal. And we looked at each other and we're like, let's embrace this. Like, this could get very stifling very fast. So let's figure out ways of being productive in our house. Let's figure out ways of dealing with each other where we're the only people we're going to see and all that. And I will say that, like, for both of us, it was a really positive experience. I'm not saying that it was a desired experience. Obviously, it's terrible. COVID was terrible. But we chose to sort of dive into new things and new experiences within the constraints we had. And sometimes when you're constrained, that's when, you're most creative. And so, we got a lot done in the last year. And so that was a really unique experience. And one, I hope we don't have to do continually or again, I guess. But I can't say that it was bad, like for our family or for ourselves. It was terrible for society and for the economy and for all of that. But we chose to embrace that limitation and got a lot done.
You mentioned a product. Believe me, we'll dive back into this. But
yeah. So this is I got an email from a friend saying, I'm sending you some meat from Maui. And that was all it said. And I was like, I get a million food products, right? I mean, like because of Alinea and Tock and whatnot. I'm very fortunate that purveyors from all over the world send me interesting stuff. And the reality is that most of it isn't terribly unique, some new salt or something like that. I got a box of venison from Maui and watched the video, Maui Nui venison, and was instantly like, wow, it's a USDA certified product that is actually wild. And this guy, Jake Muse, took 10 years to get all that done and certified. And there's 50,000 axis deer on Maui, just decimating ranches and farms and the environment. So it's ecologically sustainable to harvest these animals. But what's really amazing is because they're wild and they eat the vegetation of Maui, which is like, fertile soil, everything like that. It was mind-blowingly good. So much so that even though I didn't know the producer or the guy or anything about him other than the video on his website, I emailed him and said, that's one of the greatest products I've ever had. Immediately had some shipped to Alinea. It was on the menu 2 weeks later. And now I'm an investor in his business. That doesn't happen very often. That's why I say it's a hair bit self-serving. But the reality is that product came to me 8 months ago. And I was instantly in awe of the quality and the mission that he put together, which is really amazing.
You've got me salivating over here. For the last probably year and a half, I've heard about just how delicious axis deer are. I have not tried it yet. So now, without a doubt, jumping on the website, going to order some deer.
Yeah, it's a wonderful place.
Well, one of the things you brought up a minute ago around the constraints that COVID put on us, and then those constraints, they breed creativity. I'm wondering, knowing that, I mean, you're such a creative person. We're going to talk a lot about creativity. Is there anything you do in your own environment to add on additional constraints to help bring out some more of that creative nature of you?
I think one of the mind tricks I play on myself is that once I feel like something should be done, I sort of announce it to friends, family, publicly, whatever it may be, because then I feel a greater sense of obligation or even like a social contract to deliver it. And so like, you know, when I was first going to do Tock and I wanted to force the function of having to, sell tickets to a restaurant in 2010. When we announced the restaurant, we did a little movie trailer for it that I did with Martin Kastner. And it said tickets, yes, tickets on sale soon. And I had no idea how I was going to make that happen. That was like the opening was 9 months away or something like that. So I knew I had 9 months to do it, but I would never have opened without doing it. And so I forced myself by announcing it publicly to finish the job. And, I think that's true. Like people go on diets, sometimes do that, or workout programs or whatnot. And it's just a way of keeping yourself accountable, at least for me, because I don't want to tell you, like if I told you on this podcast, yes, I'm working on this project and 6 months from now it's going to launch, I would feel a sense of obligation to do that.
These Jedi mind tricks to help you get going. Is that something you've always done throughout your life? Just built in these mechanisms to help force you to develop creativity or even around entrepreneurship and business?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was always the kid that wanted to do well, like even in school and whatnot. Probably because I felt like my parents didn't have the same opportunities. So I felt a sense of obligation to, excel, try my hardest, do well, all of that. And that probably lingers on with me, into my adult life. Like I definitely, my sense of obligation has shifted from myself to my employees and to other people who are supported by the businesses we create. But it's definitely the case where if you have a sense of obligation, you tend to get things done. And the creativity is just like when you're resource constrained, you kind of go, oh, yeah, figure some shit out here. Like I think that's all creativity is. It's just like it's iteration and, it's a result that ends up being surprising even to you. Right.
No, absolutely. I find that really intriguing. You mentioned that shift for me to the people that work for me. I'm wondering, like, when did this shift happen, right? Because you started being in Chicago derivatives trader, which is much like a zero-sum game, where all of a sudden now you're like spreading all this positivity towards other people with the restaurant, great meals. How does that transition happen for you?
For me, it happens as you get employees and you realize that as a business grows, it's one thing if you have 5 or 10 people as employees and you know them all personally, there's a sense of mutual obligation there and whatnot. But now with having hundreds and hundreds of employees and literally thousands over a 15 or 20 year period, many of whom have gone on to do other interesting things, you end up realizing that the decisions that you make actually affect hundreds of families and that they don't always have insights into, no matter, even if you have the best intentions in the world, it's impossible to adequately communicate all of the reasons why something is being done. One of my great frustrations, is that, and I'm looking at Twitter less and less because of it, is that you do things in your business and then somebody picks apart one little piece, even if it's another business owner or someone who has an agenda for their particular business or their particular life, their particular city. And they don't realize that, hey, first and foremost, there's 300 employees. And even if you don't understand why I'm making the decision that it benefits them, and even if you think it doesn't benefit them, you have very little of the information of what's going on here. So, I think that shift is just a sense of responsibility. It's no different, honestly, than if you become a parent. Everyone says like you become a parent and all of a sudden you have this child and instantaneously your priorities shift. I think with growing a business, that shift happens more slowly. It's not like you birth a business and go, holy cow, like, but eventually you wake up one day and you go, oh my gosh, I have like this profound sense of responsibility, not only to our clients, but even more so to the people who decided willfully to join this group of people and work on something. So that's about creating new opportunities for them as much as it's for yourself.
Yeah, I love the point you bring up of having like the complete encapsulation of what this business is. And so many people only see these small subsects and they don't understand the complete picture. And as the leader of that business,
I see the press do that all the time, where they call a business leader and they get their headline, their headline statement or their headline thought or initiative or whatever. And then they don't understand more broadly, like, oh, well, that's performative because it actually isn't going to do anything for the employees or the customers. Or, yeah, that looks good for the industry, but really, like, it will never be implemented widely. And so I see that on a daily basis. And I suppose, like, if you're not a business owner, if you don't have skin in the game, you can't understand what that's like. Like, so if you're just a reporter, for even a prestige, magazine or newspaper or something like that, if you don't own that newspaper, you have no idea what a small business owner is going through. So it's tricky, and I you can't let it frustrate you, but it is tricky.
What part of running the business do you enjoy the most? Like what just lights you up inside?
It's always about creating something that is new or novel, right? Which happens very infrequently. I mean, if you think about it, like if you are creating a new restaurant, we were building Alinea and we opened, like the minute we opened was very cathartic, but probably wasn't until like the end of year one where I felt like, hey, we've created something, a new experience here, a very novel experience. Like it takes a long time to do that. And then you might go 4 or 5 years before you transform something again enough to do that. I will say that like the very first day I turned on the predecessor to Tock, and at first it broke and then we kind of fixed it and then it started running. The minute I saw that people were actually prepaying for a reservation at Next Restaurant in 2011, I got on the phone, walked around the block and said, it's going to take 20 years, but this is going to change the way people buy things in the future. Like dynamic and variable pricing in real time for service-oriented businesses is an inevitability. It has nothing to do with me or Tock or anything. It's just like, of course, that's the way it should be. But that realization that, like very few people realize this, it seems inevitable. It's almost like discovering a new mathematical axiom or something like that. And then, I actually bothered to build enough of it to try it and test this little thing that already exists in the universe. Like I can measure, it's like if you can measure something that exists, like a radio frequency or something like that. And all of a sudden you go, I'm tuned into that. And then you start looking around and it's like, like that thing is everywhere, but I never had a way of measuring it before. So for me, that can be a piece of music, or it could be, a piece of software. And they end up feeling very much the same over time, as you kind of get a couple of these little self-discoveries and try to get them out into the world. It's just a normal process. Like if you read other people about like how they've built or discovered things or whatnot, like they're like, it was there all along. I just happened to tune into it. And I never really understood that. It's like I like to write music occasionally and I'm terrible at it. And I haven't figured out how to tune into that just yet. But if you listen to like great songwriters, they understand that process of tuning into whatever it may be. And they say afterwards, like, it was like that melody was there all along. I just kind of picked it out. And now, of course, that's not true, but it feels that way. So that to me is the exciting part of creating anything.
I'm thinking about just that mindset overall. It almost seems like you're extremely good at that delayed gratification. So for you, is it really like that intellectual stimulation is all throughout the process? I guess I'm wondering like when the end moment comes, when the business is launched, when you
Oh,
get
that's yeah. And the weird part is that's the worst part.
it's almost like this huge
Like,
letdown, right? Like you,
yeah, well, it's like I always set goals that seem pretty broad. I kind of work with the end in mind and work backwards.
do you
Like,
have like an example of what that might look like?
yeah, I mean, I can tell you that in the first year I was trading as a floor trader. Now you have to remember this is like the Eddie Murphy trading places kind of days, right? Before your time, where you were in the floor screaming and yelling and all of that, and it was very primal. And the saying on the floor used to be that if you break even your first year, you'll have a future, right? And I thought that was a terrible goal, like because if you have a goal of breaking even, you're probably going to break even, right?
Yeah.
So I set a goal of making $200,000 profit trading the first year. And that seemed very daunting, especially because that is an intimidating place. Like you go down there and people just want to eat their young there, right? Like I am the competition. Like you said, it's a zero-sum game. I was mercilessly made fun of. I was super skinny at the time. And, at the end of the day, like I was very, very, very much driven to make this work because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, but I was fascinated by derivatives and the process and the sort of the primal nature of the game that was being played there. And $200,000 sounds insurmountable, but then you break it down and you say, well, there's 250 trading days a year. That's like $800 roughly a day. And if every tick, which is like the minimum fluctuation, is $12.50, I need to make about 60 of those a day. And in the course of 8 hours, that only means I need to make like 1 or 2 winning single tick trades per hour. That seems very doable. And indeed, I did it, and it was very, very intimidating and very difficult. But in my first year, I made just about $200,000 trading, and I had a backer, so he got 40% of that or something like that. But I made a very good living in my first year of trading, and so immediately, like as I recognized that was coming, I was like, oh, I need to reset this goal, and I went for 4x that the following year. Now again, sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's the same thing. All I have to do is 4 times the size in any given trade. So instead of doing 1 contract at a time, you do 5 at a time, but do the exact same thing. So where people break down is that they start thinking about the money being like a lot or something. And it always frustrates me. Another thing that frustrates me, a lot of things are frustrating me today, like, in public discourse, is that like people want to drag down the billionaires or something like that, right? Like Bezos, like going to space, like, or Branson or whatever. And what you have to look at is the interviews of him 25, 30 years ago. And he's tuned into the internet in 1995, so much so that he quits a very lucrative job and takes, the proverbial like door to make a desk, off the wall because he's saving money. He's got his one little warehouse in Seattle. And yeah, it's really easy to go like, oh, this guy's evil now or whatever. But like, that was a 30 plus year thing where he took those little incremental steps along the way. Now you can argue about, whether a guy should have $200 billion or whether, but that wealth was not taken from someone else. An entirely new, it is not a zero-sum game like derivatives. And so like, he didn't take that from either his employees or from us or from anywhere else. It was created out of whole cloth. It was a brand new thing. So, there are things that Amazon has done that I disagree with in terms of labor practice or whatnot. And fine, let's argue that. But you can't argue that he took money from anyone else.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think there's a funny, I think it was 60 Minutes, like in 2001, he was already a billionaire and they're doing the piece and he's driving this like Toyota Corolla from like the early 90s.
Like, look, so here's the other thing is that most people who shout about the billionaires don't know any.
Yeah.
I probably know, I've never counted. I'm guessing I know a dozen to 20 people who are worth $1 billion or more. every one of them is none of them are sitting on a yacht somewhere, traveling around doing stupid shit. They all get up early and work their asses off and are interested in doing interesting things and creating things and whatnot. And that's how they got their money. And what people don't get is that the money was a byproduct of those things. I don't know one of those people who their goal was, I'm going to make and hoard $1 billion. What they said is that I'm going to make some amazing stuff that's going to empower a lot of people. And I remember one of the arguments, I was a philosophy major and I was taking a business ethics class, and we were studying and reading Marxism, which a lot of folks who claim to be Marxists actually probably haven't done. And, you know, we kind of said like, well, what if we reset everybody to exactly the same level tomorrow? Like everybody starts off exactly the same and you'd have this wonderful equality and whatnot. And then Michael Jordan comes out of retirement to play basketball and 50,000 people show up and they each want to give $2 of their dollars to see him play. All of a sudden, Michael's got $100 grand and he can do that every day. So Michael Jordan, this is at the time, you know, he was, you know, the biggest basketball player. Michael Jordan is going to be very unequal very quickly, and not because of anything other than the fact that he is incredibly driven to be that skilled. And everyone's willing to take a tiny little piece of what they've got and give it to that person. And so even within a Chinese system or a Russian system or whatnot, that happens. It happens sort of naturally. And so it's a tricky thing to figure out the right balance for that. But I also think it's pretty inevitable that certain people are just highly driven to become exceptional at what they do.
So speaking about being highly driven, I want to go back to your early days as a derivatives trader and something you did, which I have to unpack and figure out from you, where you essentially like fake your resume in the wrong direction and end up taking $5 to be a runner. Like what's going through your head, young Nick Kokonas?
Well, you know, I was fortunate to grow up with a dad who worked really hard, served in both the Army and the Navy, drafted into both, which is crazy. And, he was part of the Greek community in Chicago that, he didn't go to college. His dad died when he was really young. He worked at a grocery store from a young age. And I knew a bunch of like Greek second cousins and whatnot that were doing really, really well financially with small businesses, ownership. We're talking about like the Greek hot dog stand kind of thing. And I had a second or third cousin that was a really, really good beer and hot dog sales guy in the summers during his college years at Wrigley Field. And he made a ton of money, all cash, And I remember hearing about how much money he made. And I don't know the number. I just remember that it was more than my buddies who were going to Goldman Sachs were making out of Colgate. And that was his like 4-month summer job, And I just went like, wow, like, yeah, Goldman Sachs is more prestigious. And it's almost like if you make it through the hazing, essentially, of your first 5 years there, you're almost guaranteed to make a very good living. It's like being a dentist or something like that. Like you may not like digging in people's mouths, but you're for sure going to make $400,000 or $500,000 a year, right? Like, I don't know anyone who wakes up. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but like you show me a 25-year-old who's like, yeah, I love mouths, right? It's like, no, they just want a very secure livelihood. And of course, everyone needs a dentist. So like, that's probably some of what's going on there. But when I got out of school, I'd gotten into a joint JD PhD program at Penn, and everyone was encouraging me. And this is kind of the false currency of elite institutions. And believe me, I've poked at my alma mater for this, where the way that they measure themselves is like the average graduate's earnings 5 years out. And the number of people that graduate as a percentage and the number of people that get employment right away and all of that, which I get, I totally understand that. But for me, I was like, okay, well, I've got this wonderful degree. It's taught me how to think. I feel like I've gotten a tremendous amount out of it. But now that I have to actually make money, the best way to make money is not become a lawyer. That's the best way to minimize risk. And I had no interest in minimizing the risk because all of my dad didn't have a choice to minimize risk. And so I was basically looking to maximize risk at a young age when you can afford to live on ramen and, like have a little 1 bedroom and like not have any of the trap. Like you don't need much when you're 22. You just get out of a dorm room. Why do I want to take a job with Goldman Sachs and then eat shit for 5 years so that I can sell bonds, And so for me, I was like, the trading floor was the kind of place where it seemed like the riskiest thing to do, like it was like, I knew people doing really, really well there financially. They didn't seem that highly educated. So it seemed doable. That was like an actual doable thing. And then in order to get down on the floor there, what did I do? Well, I started interviewing the Societe Generale and Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch and all that, because that was the pathways that I was pointed to get down to a trading floor. And I had done well enough academically. I was, Phi Beta Kappa, all that. I'd always get the interview. I would do well in the psych tests. I would do well in the math tests. I would do well in the logic tests. I would get down to the final interview. And I would be like, well, what kind of job am I applying for? And they said, well, we don't know yet, essentially, but you're coming into this prestigious firm and we're going to find the best place for you. And I was like, no, I want to get down on the trading floor and I want to be a trader. And they said, well, sure, you're going to go through this 1.5 to 2 year program and you might end up there, but you might end up being a better bond salesman. And I was just like, okay, well, this is the wrong path, but I didn't know the right path to take. So I went to try to just apply for a job as a clerk on the trading floor, just so I could see what it was actually like. And when I would apply to the clearing firms, they're kind of the middlemen between every trade. Being a clerk back then, a yellow coat just meant that you held up an order and ran it to the pit. It was a completely unskilled job. So I literally went there with resumes, paper, and like knocked on doors and handed them out. And I mean, finally, one guy told me the reason you're not getting a call back is because you're hugely overqualified. You should go talk to Goldman Sachs. And so I was just like, oh, I got to get rid of all my academic achievements. So I just got rid of everything good on my resume and went there and took a $5.35 an hour job.
What's the thinking? Like, I would love to know how you're projecting in the future. Like, do you see?
All I knew was that I couldn't, you have to get a foot in the door.
Yeah.
And the foot in the door I wanted was not a traditional one. I wanted to go down there and figure out what was happening down there. I just wanted to be in the environment and look around. It's like becoming a bat boy and just to figure out what do managers do in baseball anyway, right? Or a water boy so you can watch the NBA from on the floor. All I wanted to do was get up close and I couldn't, And so this was tedious, mind-numbing, stupid work. But, well, I worked my way up from runner to clerk to phone clerk in about 2.5 months, which normally takes like 1.5 years. But they were just like, oh, you're really smart. And finally, once I was in there, I told the guy who was my boss what I did. He was just giggling. Like he thought that was funny as hell. And my peer group were literally drug dealers. And I'm not saying that like in any negative way. Like they dealt drugs. They took jobs down there from the gangs to deal coke to a bunch of coke-addled traders. That's flat out like who 3 of the 4 of my literal peer group was. I mind-blowing, right?
No.
Right.
I love the analogy of the bat boy. So like, I'm wondering, I mean, obviously like elite education, there's so much in theory you can read about. What do you have to just fully live and experience? And like, what's the lesson you got out of there that can only happen if you're actually in the arena?
Look, I don't even like for the restaurants that I own now, no one kind of that works for us probably knows what I do day to day. But when Alinea first opened and Grant got sick, I went in there and polished glasses. Like you have to do the work that is going on in your business. And so for me, going down on the trading floor and seeing how the clerks worked, seeing how the runners worked, meeting dozens of traders. Like then I could like, when it was downtime, there's a lot of slow times there. Like there's a lot of times when nothing's going on. It's not all screaming 8 hours a day, every day. So I started like going like, oh, that guy looks interesting. And I would literally just poke him and start talking to him, saying like, how did you get to be a trader? You seem like you're a good one. Like what's going on here? And that was invaluable. Like you have to meet the players, so to speak. So how do you meet the players? Well, if you're a bat boy, you probably meet all the players, and you don't show up day one going, hey, Mr. like, A-list player, like what? But over time, you establish some sort of rapport and respect from them. And then you can start asking questions. And that's all I did. It's like I finally, 6 months in, I was really concerned that it was a dumb decision. And then I met a trader that was super geeky, seemed different than the other guys, was trading options for his own account, was trading very small, and had gone to the University of Chicago, studied math. Like he just seemed different than, more intellectual, a little different than the other guys. And when I finally identified him, I was like, I want to work for you. And he was like, oh, I just hired a clerk 2 weeks ago. I don't need one. And I was like, I would pay to work for you. Literally. Like I'll pay you $500 a week to work for you. And he was like, why? So I explained everything I just explained. And he was like, oh, wow, that's really weird. Okay, well, you don't have to pay me. I'll pay you $400 a week. And then I got to stand next to this guy and learn options theory. And he was a really good teacher. And when it was downtime, I'd go, like having the computer upstairs is stupid. We need to get a computer down here. We need better software. You're like, the software sucks. So like it became this mutual thing where I was like highly energized by learning this very esoteric stuff. Hands-on, said, yeah, my goal is to get down here and be a trader within a year. I got 6 months left, man. Like I need a full download. And he's like, no one does that in 6 months. And I'm like, I'm going to do that in 6 months. And so he's like, he to his credit, like he was like, okay, like, if you want it in 6 months, here's everything that we're going to have to do. And he ended up becoming one of the largest or the largest independent bond traders in the world. And a couple of years later, after I started trading, he offered me a partnership. I didn't really like the terms. I kind of wanted to go out on my own, so I did. But I feel a huge sense of debt to him even now, even though we don't chat much or anything like that. Like we've gone in totally different directions. But Frank Serino, if you're out there, thank you. He was a great mentor, a great dude.
You become so much clearer with that story. Like this is why I love talking with you, Nick. You are unique. You're different, the way you approach things. And so you actively seeking out someone that you go, you know what, this guy's doing something a little bit different. I'm wondering, have you thought about this like just unique blend where you're highly analytical, data-driven, logical, but then you've got this like beautiful artist, creative nature, and like you perfectly blended the two?
I guess for me, I don't like people like you go on these things and people want to say that and stuff, but you also have to know is that like I floundered around for a year or two before I figured out how to get down on the floor. Like these things all seem like neat little packages, but meanwhile, my now wife, then girlfriend, fiance was working at Citibank to enable me to take these risks. So like in hindsight, it looks like a neat package, but what people really need to understand is that some of these things were done out of a sense of like frustration, desperation, all those things. They sound like you decided one day to get, fake your resume in the wrong direction. But what you have to remember is that like, that was like a 4 or 6 month process of failure and trying to figure out like, why am I getting offers from Merrill Lynch, but I can't get a shitty job? Like I want the shitty job. Now, I guess wanting the bad job is the thing that seems novel. But I go back over and over again to Paul Graham has an essay, which I read long after all of this, called How to Do What You Love. And I get from podcasts like this, people email me and they say, I would like some life advice, or I'm 23 years old now and I want to take similar risks. And I send them that Paul Graham essay because it's better than anything I can articulate. And in there, what he says is that prestige is false currency. The most interesting businesses to me are often the least prestigious, And so I guess because the reason I mentioned my dad is like my dad owned a temporary labor office which was in a terrible part of Chicago because it had to be, because that's where people wanted temporary labor. And I remember this juxtaposition of like going to an Ivy covered school in upstate New York and studying philosophy and all of that. And then going back in the summer and seeing my dad get up at 4 a.m. and go to work. But he was the guy who was at my basketball games when I was in high school at 3 p.m, but the dentists weren't. And by the way, he was making twice as much as a dentist, and no one knew because he's a little Greek guy and everyone just assumed that he's not very bright, you know? And so I internalized that prestige was bullshit very early on. And that was, I mean, if anything, you know, I look at a lot of businesses now and the people that I like to invest in, like the Maui Nui Venison, amazing business person, amazing business, positive ecological impact. I don't think there's anybody in college right now who's going, you know, oh yeah, like I'm going to be out there at 3 a.m. shooting axis deer. So I look at that and like, does he care about prestige at all? No, he's got a mission, you know, and that's everything. That's why it seems novel, I guess.
I don't know. I almost feel like it doesn't seem so neat. Like on the surface it might, but then like you start uncovering some of the layers to you and it's like, oh no, you were grinding it out. You were taking extreme risk and you were working your ass off. We're like, I don't know. It's just like,
the last year has taken a real toll, even though the outcomes were great, because when COVID hit, I was basically like, okay, we don't have any restaurants anymore. The restaurants are going to get shut in 2 weeks. And Tock at the time was doing reservations and experiences, prepaid experiences for restaurants, and they're all about to shut. So both of the businesses at once were going to go to zero. And that's what I had worked on for the last 17, well, at the time, 15 years. And instead of like, there was a moment where I went, oh God, this is overwhelming. Like I am in the wrong industry for this. And then I remember the moment I was sitting in my office at home and I just went, well, time to suck it up again. Like, you know, what can we be doing to take advantage of this in the Churchillian sort of way, right? You know, like never waste a good crisis, right?
Exactly.
And I remember that a very, very, very famous chef called me and they were gonna have to process a lot of refunds and like, it was just a cluster, right? You know, it's like, there's counterparty risk that Tock had, all this stuff. And by then I had fired myself up going, you have no idea, like there's going to be like 2% of the people in this whole industry that think new shit up right now. And you're complaining to me. Like, and I quoted that Churchill quote to him and he was offended by it. Like he was genuinely offended. And I said, you know, he's like, this is a real crisis. And I said, absolutely. It's terrible. Can you shut it off? You can't shut it off. Okay. What are you going to do about it? Stop going on TV and saying how terrible everything is and actually fucking do something. Like, I remember I sat my wife down and I was very emotional. And I just said like, this is terrible, all that. I'm going to need a very wide berth for the next year. Like I'm going to need some latitude and I'm going to kind of disappear for a while. And she said, you already have more latitude than any husband I know. Like, you know, like, I'm like, I need even more, you know? And what was really interesting is that like 6 or 7 months in, she came up and she was just like, holy shit, like you killed this. And it was really good. You know, I mean, it was really tough, but it was really good.
A few things I want to dive a little bit deeper on. First, that overwhelm factor. I kind of want to know like the progression of that. How long does that last? And is it just like a flip of the switch?
Well, I think it lasts less every time once you've gone through it a bunch.
Just muscle memory?
More like, well, I could go through the 5 stages and spread that out over like, you know, 8 months or whatever, right? Or I could just get over myself and get to work. So, you know, when I mentioned the counterparty risk at the time that COVID hit, and we're talking about weeks before, any shutdowns happened or whatnot.
Well, I mean, that's because you're like highly attuned to this type of stuff. You sense changes in markets, I'm assuming. And so you can be
And
attuned to
again,
that.
because you've seen it, you've seen these crises, all of the train wrecks happen in slow motion. Like '08,
It's such a good line.
there was plenty of time in '08 to hedge your positions and get out. But people see the crisis, and instead of going like, wow, this is serious, this is bad, most people at first just want to go, it probably won't happen. So if something has a 5 or 10% chance of happening, but it is catastrophic, you have to turn 100% of your attention to that 5% or 10%. And so that's what I did. Like when Seattle COVID numbers came up, I talked to a doctor that I knew, and who was a very bright, broadly read doctor. And he was like, yeah, it's a pretty low risk, but it's non-zero. It's probably 15% that this goes nationwide if they don't do something. And it doesn't appear that they're going to do anything about it. And I went like, wow, 15%. That's a lot more than I thought. Like that might be everything. So at that moment, I woke up the next day. I was thinking all about the Alinea Group and the restaurants and what we need to do to protect our staff and our customers and how we continue on and all that. And then I went, oh my God, there's $30 million of prepaid reservations that we've sent out to restaurants. And they're going to have to return all that money. And I don't know if they have it. And there was an email that I sent to our CFO when we decided to send out, like almost like Kickstarter, where you send out the money before the product's delivered. Back then, not now, we can't do that anymore. I sent an email where he was saying, we don't want to take that risk. Like we have to hold the money back and all that. I said, this is a huge benefit to restaurants and wineries. We need to send them the money ahead. And that will be a differentiating feature of Tock. And all of a sudden I woke up. Well, I sent him an email at the time because he's very conservative. And I said, look, it's not like every restaurant in America could close at once. We're going to have some restaurant close sometime, and we're going to lose $100,000 or $200,000. That's inevitable. But it's not like 5,000 restaurants are all going to close at once. And all of a sudden I woke up and I went, oh my God, 5,000 restaurants are all going to close at once. And we have $30-some million that's going to vaporize if they can't do their refunds. So I called him up, Steve Bernanke is his name. And I said, Steve, we have a lot of counterparty risk. And you could almost like hear the silence where he was like, yeah, what do you think I've been thinking about for the last 24 hours, And I was like, okay, we need to measure this. And then we need to figure out we just need to stack rank our risk. It's the 80-20 rule. 80% of your risk is probably 20% of your clients. Let's figure out those 20%. Let's start calling them personally. Let's get the refunds. Let's get some engineering work done so we can batch process refunds. And within a week, we had solved that problem. And our total loss on that $30 million was $8,200, $8,200.
Jeez.
Yeah. But at the time I didn't know that. So like you say, how does that happen and what sort of time frame and all that? And the answer is like, I woke up, realized I had a serious problem or a potential serious problem. This is before shutdowns, easier to do before like the total crisis hits. And immediately, instead of going, we're going to be shut, we're going to go out of business, you instead go, this is an existential risk. How do I figure it out? And we did so very, very quickly.
I'm just trying to think about like the past year. Of course, it's been a crazy year for everyone, but just like the ups, the downs, even Tock becoming acquired. Like, how do you encapsulate this past year?
There's a bit of a cliche that some people have said that it accelerated natural trends, like retail online commerce went up. It was going up, 3 or 4% a year. And it got to like 20%. And then all of a sudden during COVID, it went to 35% a year. And people are like, oh, it'll revert. And it's like, no, probably not, because it was going to get to 35% anyway. For me personally, it accelerated my own path as well. Partly because I did a bunch of stuff that just got stuff done that accelerated all of those things you mentioned into a year instead of over a course of 4 or 5 years, because people had to make decisions. you know? And then also like, for me personally, man, it was tiring. I'm old now. I can't run at the pace I used to run at when I was a 25-year-old trader, but I had that muscle memory of doing it. Like it was interesting to get into that mindset and mode of working really, really fast. You didn't have time to test the batch refund thing. Like normally we go through QR, quality control testing and we're going to roll out a new software product to one or two clients so that they can test it in the wild. They're going to get feedback to us and our account management team and all that. And this was like, hey, is the batch refund thing ready? Yeah, we got something. Hit go. And boy, I dig that. The downside of running a larger company and now a publicly traded subsidiary of Squarespace, which has been wonderful, is that like that pace of like, yeah, let's give it a shot, see what happens. You can't really do that, right? Like that'd be irresponsible. So, but I miss that. And I that was kind of an interesting part of things, but it's tiring and scary.
I'm wondering that, I mean, you said that's kind of irresponsible. I think about this as like, those are major decisions of consequence. Like, could you speed that up in your own progression, doing things like that earlier, just so that muscle memory is like highly condensed in these rapid, like iterative feedback cycles?
I think you have to know when to do that and when not to do it. Right. And so when you have something that's an existential risk or an asymmetric risk or an opportunity where the window is closing very quickly for whatever reason, you have to be willing to jump at it. And so like every rule, there's an exception to the rules. Like I look at people who are rigid rule followers and I never relate to them.
Right there with you.
And to me that I don't mean ethical or moral rules either, right? Like I'm talking about like rules that are more tradition than rule, like for no good reason. So like I think that sometimes like if I'm talking to a CFO or a finance person or something like that at a company, and I'm talking to the marketing team and I'm telling them, you have to be aggressive and crazy and take risks. And if you blow it, you blow it. Don't worry about it. And the CFO is sitting there going like, I don't want any part of this guy. And I'm like, dude, I'm not talking to you. You're the CFO. Of course, we're going to do the accounting down to the penny. Like, I'm not telling you to be unethical or take risks with the accounting. Of course not. Like that'd be stupid. But that's not marketing. Like you should not be talking to the marketing department and telling them to not take risks, or the design development department or something like that. So like, that's really, you have like, I don't want my heart surgeon taking undue risk on me, right? Or the dentist or whatever, right? Those are just different roles. But when you're building a business or building, in my mind, your own career, if you don't take risk, you know exactly where you're going to end up.
Yeah. You mentioned this past year, just like such a steep learning curve, even about yourself, like just being able to step back, analyze for a bit. I mean, you had to do so much. Where do you think your skills are best? Like, where is Nick Kokonas? Like just the top 99.999% of people?
Oh, I don't want to say, I have a unique ability to look across disciplines and have, there's some people that are very narrow and miles deep, and I'm kind of shallow and miles wide. So I can often see something that someone's doing and go, oh, that's just like this. And like people are always like, well, you studied philosophy and then you became finance and then you ran restaurants, and then software. Like that's a really weird progression. And I'm like, no. These are all the same things. Like to me, they all seem very, very related.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that, look, derivatives trading is about probability and statistics, right? Booking a restaurant is about probability and statistics. Building software is about probability and statistics. And probability and statistics is based off of the fundamentals of logic and math. And when I was in college studying philosophy, which people, think like, Descartes or, I think therefore I am or whatever. What they're trying to get at is what are the fundamental first principles of thought or language or logic or math. So if you read Bertrand Russell or Wittgenstein, if I showed you some early Wittgenstein, it's symbolic logic. It looks like math. It doesn't look like, he'll say, a couple lines, and then he'll prove it with axioms that were written out in symbolic logic. So studying philosophy and studying derivatives, perfect fit. That, like, I got down there, and once I started understanding how options relate to each other, I was mesmerized, because you have all these contingent probabilities based off of a single origin. And then you have layers of derivatives in the mathematical sense. And I would go like, oh my God, this goes miles deep. Like, there's curves upon curves, and everything's logarithmic and nonlinear. And like, it was just really exciting to see it all. And then you start building software, and it's the same thing.
So is it that
Marketing
ability
is the same thing
to spot those commonalities?
Yeah, I think so. And I also think that like I hate when I hear, like, I remember there was a governor saying, we should get rid of all humanities studies and just have our students study STEM. Now I am obviously pro science and engineering and all of that. And I think the US lags in that. But if you don't know how to apply those things, if you don't have people going, well, where in humanity should we be applying these resources and this engineering and whatnot, you have nothing. So you need both. And I think that the people that I'm most fascinated by, which, by the way, are the people that both get vilified and held up as, like, if you listen to old Steve Jobs interviews, he went to design school, dropped acid, and dropped out. You know what I mean? Like, but he was smart enough. He wasn't an engineer, but he was smart enough to understand engineering and understand that, like, hey, music can be on your phone. Like, that seems like obvious now. It seemed very cool and weird when he announced it. And, but he was also vilified, terrible leader, demanding all of that, like, probably wouldn't cut it nowadays. And I look at people like that and I just go like, oh yeah, like, they didn't study just STEM or just humanities. They did both. You have to do both.
You mentioned Jobs. I'm wondering who are those thinkers that you're just like, I would just love to just like nerd out with for a few hours, really expand my thinking.
Oh, I mean, they're all philosophers for me. I don't read business books ever. I mean, I have read some business books, but I don't, there's not many of them. But like, they're all dead. AJ Ayer, Russell, Wittgenstein. I did get to meet Murray Gell-Mann, who I had dinner with a couple times, who discovered the quark. And right now I'm friends with Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in economics. What's fascinating about Thaler and Gell-Mann, who won Nobel Prize in physics and all that, is that you meet a Nobel Prize winner and you expect everything out of their mouth to be a work of genius, right? Like, it just, like, when you're growing up, you're like, I will never meet anybody who won a Nobel Prize. And I remember that I had read one of Dr. Gell-Mann's books, which all of a sudden the name's escaping me. It's called like The Tiger and something. Anyway, Quark and the Tiger, something like that. Jaguar, Quark and the Jaguar. That's it. Got a cat in there somewhere. So, and finding it wonderful, and found out, like, after I met him, like, he was bananas crazy and fun. I got out of that dinner party and was so frustrated by the other people there that I sold my house and moved out of the neighborhood. For real. Because I was like, I don't want my kids growing up amongst these people, because they were bigoted towards him, like, because he kind of had this thick Jewish accent and everything. But meanwhile, I was going like, this man discovered the quark, won the Nobel Prize, did this work when he was in his 20s, like many mathematicians do. They do amazing work, early on in their life. And I have this opportunity here to chat with him and to learn about him. And all he wanted to talk about was the Santa Fe Institute, global warming, and this is 20 years ago, and Cormac McCarthy, who was his office mate, the writer, the great writer. So he just wanted to talk about literature. And I was just going like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And then when I wrote a blog about the predecessor to Tock, and said, dynamic and variable timing for prime time slotted businesses is the norm and whatnot. Richard Thaler started reaching out to me on Twitter, but I had no idea who he was. And it's finally someone said, hey, like this guy's the real deal. Like you need to respond to him. And we went golfing and we went out there and we were talking about football probabilities. Now, neither of us is like crazy into football, but he was basically like the decision-making of coaches is based on minimizing their personal liability of getting fired, not winning the games. And I was like, yes, of course, except for that guy in high school who had his team do 4 downs every time, no matter where they were on the field. And he knew all about that, of course. And we became great friends. And he became an investor and advisor to Tock. And, the thing I learned from interacting with those people is that if you did get a chance to talk to Wittgenstein or Plato, probably, they'd probably want to talk about their dinner. Like it's not like you're writing, you're not writing the manifesto every day. You're living and learning and being human. And all of these people that I've met and others are multifaceted individuals, which is the most fascinating thing to me. And I think the thing that our leaders miss the most, even within cabinet positions and the administrations and whatnot, instead of hiring generalists, they hire highly regarded specialists. And that to me is a very tricky, siloed approach to the world.
Yeah, I was even just coming across, this is a sports article, a research project, and it was around the best athletes long-term actually start out as generalists and then focus later. And they develop that foundation on those broad skills. Speaking of like just unique things that you go deep on, I know you put a ton of thought into the design of your kitchen. I love design. I love cooking.
No. But we need to pause there. Credit to my wife. I did almost nothing for my kitchen. So let's just be very clear. Like I'm going to point to this part of this tape. Dagmara Kokonas designed 95% of that kitchen. I did the sink and the floor, but not much else. And the stove, not much else.
But that stove, doesn't that cook at double the temperature of like any normal range?
No. It's a wonderful La Cornue, which is a great product. And I worked with them to do some cool stuff for it. The stove is kind of a normal stove. Everything is a little bit different and better. But most of that does accrue to my wife. I will say that like the reason I mention the sink is because a lot of sinks have 2 compartments. And the reason that they have 2 compartments, if you have a bigger sink in your house, is because one's for the sudsy water and one's for the rinse. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't hand wash dishes anymore because we have dishwashers, but I do wash pans. And the way I do is I just put a little soap in there and I scrub them down and then I just dry them right away. Right.
Yeah.
Well, those pans don't fit in the sinks that have the 2 compartments. So that was something that was designed in the 1950s or earlier. And so I was just like, I want the biggest possible sink, single compartment. And I kept wanting it. I mean, I think it's 48 inches wide. It's huge. So I want to be able to put big stock pots in there and all that. And that's because we have dishwashers now. Like, why do we have 2 compartment sinks? It's dumb. So we did go to that level of detail, but it's really true that my wife did 99% of it.
What's the favorite thing, and we can give complete credit here to your wife, that got installed that just...
Yeah, I can't... This is easy. So we did a sink that mounts a sous vide immersion circulator. And the sink is like a bar size sink. And there's a little piece of metal welded on so that you can drop in a polyscience immersion circulator. And the beauty of that is if you're using a pot or a Cambro or something like that to do immersion circulation, you then have to clean all of that and all that. But the beauty of sous vide is like you can fill up the sink, it's insulated, and you can just mount. It's a normal sink. It works as, normally all the rest of the time. But then we can mount and just drop cryovac proteins or vegetables in there, and we can just use it as a sous vide immersion circulator. So that's very efficient. That was her idea. I honestly can't believe that no sink manufacturer is offering that. It's just like, if you're a sink manufacturer and you're listening to this, sous vide sink, use it all the time. Super simple. When you want to clean up, you just pull the drain and it drains out.
Yeah, no, I love it. Back to originality of thought there. I know we're going to wrap up here in a couple, but I'm wondering, I mean, just such a unique year, such a unique just trajectory all around. Have you started like deconstructing and just distilling down some of the lessons? I know you love writing. I'm just wondering if any of that is coming to paper.
No, I haven't had time to write. And honestly, I'm trying to figure out, my next set of goals. As I said, things accelerated. So 4 years or 5 years went into one.
Yeah.
And so I need to recalibrate what my goals are for the next 10 years. And I'm thinking about that now. I don't know what those are yet. And I really haven't had time to properly distill all of that. I will say that I do love writing, and I've got 3 outlines for books, all fiction. And one of them, I have about 100 pages written. I haven't worked on it in a little while, but that's something I do want to do, and will do, if I live long enough. And, but I also I have a ton of responsibilities, and we're not out of this yet, like it's still, the restaurants and the economy are in all sorts of turmoil right now across the industry. We're not out of COVID yet by any means.
Yeah. Say my wife and I are going out to dinner in 10 years. What's that going to look like? How different from today?
I have no idea.
No.
Like it's impossible to know. 10 years is a long time. The answer mostly is not very different. I think at like the low end, everything will get automated right down to the cooking. So like if you're going to a QSR in the future, why are humans flipping burgers at this point? Like, shouldn't happen. It's not, like those jobs are going to go away. And that also means that ordering will be digital and payment will be digital, and, payment on egress, even in fancy restaurants, will be digital. It is stupid that anyone hands you a check still. There's a lot of, inefficiencies around that. 10 minutes extra per table taken out over the course of a year is a lot. And we all have that frustration of trying to flag down a waiter and then give them a piece of plastic. It's all stupid. Like, that's going to go away. The reason that's there is because there's inherent friction in the credit card business. The credit cards just want to charge more, and they can do so right now with card not present transactions. So if you do a digital transaction, even with biometric data, they get an extra 0.8% typically on average. So like the reason you can't go into a restaurant and just pay with Apple Pay has nothing to do with Apple Pay or anything like that. It has to do with all the POS systems and credit card wanting to keep the old stuff installed so they can charge the restaurants more. So that'll go away. But the actual experience of having a great meal and celebrating your life with your friends, that's human. That's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. You know who you remind me of is the comedian Jerry Seinfeld. He's got this great
really
line. Yeah. Because he talks about it. He just walks around the world and just sees, and he gets frustrated by so many things, and he sees like how things.
Yeah, because I'm turning into a crotchety old dude. Like I watch Larry David on some of those things, and like the internal dialogue isn't far off of that at this point. Which is why that show is so good. I think that's a lot of people's internal dialogue.
I love Curb Your Enthusiasm. Larry David. Yeah, I would love to have him on. But Nick, I want to know so much that you've experienced, so much that you learned. If you were going to leave your kids with a gift, this could be mindset, skill, or anything like that, what would you love leaving them with?
Oh, that's easy. Intellectual curiosity. That's it. That's all we try to teach them. Like people say like, oh, I want my kids to do this or do that. And the answer is, I want my kids to figure out what they want to do on their own. And I don't have any expectations in that. But the only requirement I have is being intellectually curious. Like if you're not trying to figure stuff out and learn, then you're not really living, I don't think. That's the most fundamental aspect for me of the human condition. And fortunately, my wife did a good job of that too. She raised 2 great boys, and they're both, or men, I should say at this point. And they're both very intellectually curious, and curious in very different ways.
Nick, I love it. You're one of my favorite thinkers. I always love getting to talk with you, learn so much, expand my mind. I want to make sure the listeners can stay connected with you. Obviously, we did round 1 back on episode 119. Where can we send them? Where can they stay up to date with what you're doing, what you're working on with Tock, Alinea, all the restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, you can always go to my Instagram, which I believe is N Kokonas. I always get confused because Twitter's either Nick Kokonas, and I think Instagram's N Kokonas.
I'll make sure we have them linked up.
Yeah. So Instagram is probably where I post stuff up the most. Twitter, a bit, but less and less. The discourse on there is getting worse and worse, in my opinion. And, I'm Nick at Tock HQ. People email me. Like there was a guy who emailed me yesterday asking for how to do like an event for his team to motivate them and do a team building exercise and what works and what doesn't. And I emailed him back inside of 45 seconds saying, well, I know nothing about you or your team, so it would be impossible for me to comment. And he wrote back, holy shit, I cannot believe that you replied at all, let alone within a minute. So my thing is I like meeting people. I like learning. I like looking at other people's businesses. I can't do it for everyone all the time, but I've gotten a couple of cold emails in the last year from doing these podcasts and whatnot, where I'm like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Now, that's rare. It's like one out of a couple hundred, but what a gift that is to get that thing in your inbox in the morning and be like, wow, this is really cool.
Well, hopefully we send some interesting projects your way. But Nick, I can't thank you enough for joining us on What Got You There.
Thanks, Sean. Good to speak with you again.
DeLaney.